Deep in the French countryside, an ancient manor stood shrouded in darkness. Inside, 4 friends gathered. Antoine, the skeptic, Camille, the cautious one, Jean, the impulsive leader, and Marie, drawn by morbid curiosity. They had found an old book, its leather cover whispering of forbidden rituals. It spoke of l'invocation de minuit, a summoning ritual. Locals whispered of its dangers, their fear a tangible thing. But the group, emboldened by youthful arrogance, dismissed the warnings as mere superstition. Tonight, they would tempt fate. They chose the manor's abandoned chapel for their ritual. The air hung heavy with the weight of ages, the scent of decay clinging to the cold stone walls. Jean, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light, laid out the ritual objects: a silver chalice, a black candle, a tarnished mirror, and a bone-handled knife. Camille shivered, a sense of foreboding settling in her stomach. "Maybe we should reconsider," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Nonsense," Jean scoffed, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the chapel. "It's just an old story. There's nothing to be afraid of." But even as he spoke, his words lacked conviction. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, quickly replaced by a mask of bravado. They formed a circle around the ritual objects, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the flickering candlelight. Antoine, his face pale in the dim light, cleared his throat nervously. "Are you sure about this, Jean?" The chapel's silence was broken only by the whispering wind outside and the pounding of their hearts. Jean, his voice trembling slightly, began to intone the words of the ritual. The ancient words, heavy with power, seemed to claw at the edges of their reality. The black candle flickered, casting grotesque shapes that danced on the walls. The air grew thick, heavy with a palpable sense of dread. The silver chalice, filled with a viscous, dark liquid, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. Marie, her eyes wide with fear and fascination, watched as Jean picked up the bone-handled knife. He made a small cut on his palm, the blood dripping into the chalice. The liquid bubbled and hissed, the stench of iron filling the air. Camille gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Antoine, his bravado gone, looked like he might be sick. Time seemed to distort, stretching and contracting as Jean continued the ritual. The shadows in the room deepened, swirling around them like living things. A cold wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through the group, their fear a palpable thing in the sudden silence. "Jean, stop it!" Camille cried, her voice high-pitched with terror. But it was too late. An unnatural silence descended upon the chapel. The air crackled with unseen energy. The friends huddled together, their breaths shallow and quick. Then, from the darkness, came a whisper. It was a voice devoid of warmth, filled with an ancient malice that chilled them to the bone. The whisper grew louder, morphing into a guttural chanting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Camille whimpered, burying her face in Antoine's shoulder. He held her tightly, his own fear threatening to consume him. Jean, his face illuminated by an eerie, otherworldly light, seemed transfixed. He stared into the darkness, his eyes wide and unblinking. Marie, despite her terror, felt a strange sense of exhilaration. This was beyond anything she could have imagined. The temperature plummeted, a bone-chilling cold seeping into their very marrow. The chanting intensified, the words becoming clearer, more understandable. They were pronouncements of doom, promises of suffering. The entity was close. They could feel its presence, a palpable weight in the air around them. A blood-curdling scream tore through the chapel. It was Marie. She pointed, her finger trembling, towards the spot where the chalice had been. Something was emerging from the darkness, its form shifting and coalescing like smoke, given terrible life. It was vaguely humanoid, but its skin was a patchwork of shadow and light, constantly shifting and writhing. Its eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent intelligence. The entity turned its gaze upon them, and a wave of pure terror washed over the group. They scrambled back, their screams echoing in the vast chamber. Jean, finally snapping out of his trance, stumbled to his feet. "Run!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. They didn't need to be told twice. They fled, their terror lending them speed. They ran through the darkness, the entity's laughter echoing behind them, each one praying they wouldn't be the last one caught. The friends burst out of the chapel, gasping for breath. They didn't stop running until they were far from the manor. The horrifying events of the night seared into their memories. They never spoke of the ritual again, the shared trauma binding them together in a pact of silence. But they were forever changed. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. And in its gaze, they had seen their own mortality, their own insignificance in the face of the vast and terrible unknown.